Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, I have Ali Norell on the show. Ali was born in Maidstone, Kent, in the southeast of England. She holds a degree in English and European literature from the University of Warwick and speaks Italian, French, and German. Although she has loved to write since childhood, Ali came relatively late to authorship and her debut book, The Truth Inside. It is a memoir following the death of her youngest daughter, Romy, in July 2014. Ali believes strongly in the power of intuition and the direction our lives take when we follow these instincts, and often explores these themes in her work. She lives in Brighton with her husband, 3 children, and 2 cats. And today I'm excited to welcome you, Ali, to the show.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So the thing that you don't mention in this is that you're also a medium, which is what makes this book, I think, really unique. And I loved the book. It was real, it was raw, it was honest.
Thank you.
And I think as a medium and a healer, it showed that even with a very, very powerful belief system about what happens when we die, there's so much human process you have to go through when you lose someone you love, particularly, I think, a child.
Sure.
So can you tell us, normally I just jump into questions, and if people want to hear the story, they can buy your book, which I strongly recommend. But can you tell us kind of briefly your story?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a medium. I would use that term to describe the ability I think that I have. Although I will say from the top that number one is I don't work with this professionally. I never have. I don't expect I ever will. And I'm also very open to any explanations about what it is that I think that I receive. But I spent a lot of my adult life developing these mediumship skills. I just started with an interest. I was brought up to explore an interest in life after death. Both of my parents had different experiences. Very interestingly, my sister, I'm very close to my sister. She's 2 years younger than me. She is a nurse. And I would say that she is an open-minded skeptic. I know she's had experiences because she works with the dying at times. But she's kind of like, I don't know, is there any use? Prove it to me. So I did grow up with that in my background. And I was developing that really all the way up to having my children. We have 3 other children. Romy was our 3rd child of 4. I also qualified as a healer, and I worked as a birth doula, and I worked as a reflexologist helping couples with fertility issues. I kind of put it all on hold to have my kids. I wanted to be at home with my kids, but it was always a part of my life. I've always sort of talked to the spirit world, either in my head or just in my daily life. And I think what happened when we had Romy, she was 4 months old when she died. She had a brain hemorrhage. It was a very sudden passing. She was kind of on my lap 1 minute. A few hours later, she was unconscious, and within 24 hours, she'd passed.
And that's pretty uncommon.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's one of those things, right? Because since that happened to us as a family, obviously then you encounter other people who say, oh, that happened to my friend's cousin, but yeah, sure. I mean, when that happened to us, we were in shock for all sorts of different reasons. But I do remember thinking, well, what? We're at the hospital and people were trying to explain to us what's happening, and we couldn't grasp it. And the neurosurgeon that we were given at King's College Hospital in London, which is a fabulous hospital. He was an American guy, actually, and he was phenomenal. And I remember him saying, I can't really explain to you what's happened here. It's something a bit like an aneurysm, but it's so sudden and so intense, so overwhelming that we can't even pinpoint the source of it. So we've never categorically been told exactly what her cause of death was. But obviously it was a hugely shocking experience. And I think what happened to me afterwards is what I imagine happens to many other people of faith when they lose a loved one, or perhaps when they lose a child. Some people go towards that faith and it heals them and it helps them in a big way. And I think others succumb, as I did, to the kind of the anger part of your grief, where nothing makes any sense. And you're angry that what you've believed for so long isn't giving you any answers. And I guess I had the added difficulty, having worked for so many years with mediumship and developing my mediumship, I was asking myself what I imagine a lot of people who perhaps haven't read my book yet might be asking, which is like, if I have these skills, how did I not know that this was going to happen to my own daughter and to myself? Like, how did I not see this? So I shut the door on it all. I just, I didn't want to know at all. And I think what I feel makes The Truth Inside a little different to other books in its genre is that not only did I turn my back on it, so I wasn't sort of pursuing a connection with my daughter from the off, but things kept happening. So things kept happening in my home. I would experience things, my husband would experience things. And eventually I found my way back to a spiritualist church. And then over time, a handful of mediums. I probably saw about 5 or 6 over a 3 or 4 year period. And what started to happen is these mediums and the mediums that I saw at spiritualist churches were giving me detailed descriptions of what I had experienced myself in my own home. So I was already questioning those things. I do that anyway, incidentally, even as a medium when I'm working, when I have somebody and I'm doing a sitting or something, I will always question privately what I'm getting before I give anything. And I questioned these things with my daughter. I thought, okay, I'm grieving. Maybe I've gone completely insane. This isn't really, I'm hallucinating. I came up with all the excuses that a skeptic would come up with. And then, I can't explain why, but I found myself going back to the spiritualist church that I said I would never set foot in again. And this woman who had never met me before suddenly started to tell me about my daughter and to give me a quite extraordinary message, which was a message of 2 words in the end, 2 words that really made me sit up and take notice. And that was the start of it all, really. And the more that these corroborations started to happen, the more I started to think, you know what, not only am I getting my belief system and my faith, if you like, back, not only is it helping me to find some purpose in my life and to feel positive, I think it's also showing me that my daughter exists somewhere, just as I kind of always thought and hoped that she did. And obviously, eventually that brought me to the point of, do you know what, if this could help one other person or couple who's in the position that we were in, where you've buried your own child, and, the most common phrase you hear from people really is, I can't imagine what that's like. And I'd say to anyone, You can imagine it, but you don't want to.
You don't want to.
Every bit as awful as you imagine it to be and more. So I just thought, well, if I can write this stuff down, the scariest part was putting myself out there because people quite close to me in my life sort of didn't realize the extent to which I had an interest in this area. So that was quite scary, but the personal side of it didn't scare me. And because I was driven by this idea that I wanted to have a legacy for Romy and to have her name known. And also by this idea that, maybe I could help somebody, because I was looking for a book like The Truth Inside when I was recently bereaved, and I struggled to find one.
So your experience with mediums was really just a validation for what you were seeing and not accepting?
On many occasions, yes. Obviously, alongside that, I had all sorts of other exciting and interesting information. One lady did, in fact, tell me that I would write a book before I wrote one and that I would go on to write more, which at that point I didn't think was going to be in my future. So that's interesting. And again, I am completely open to the idea that, she suggested that and I did it. It's like, my point has always been, I can't argue. I don't use the words evidence or proof because I don't believe that you can prove anything that comes from the spirit world to somebody who is adamant that they don't want to believe it. And I respect that. We all we're all entitled to our own beliefs. So I was very careful when writing The Truth Inside that I didn't want to be banging people over the head with my truth and, have one of those books which is like, you've got to see the light, everyone. This is it. You're all missing out if you don't believe what I believe. No, if you don't wish to believe it, that's absolutely fine by me. This is what helped me, and I'm passing on my experiences.
Well, and I think what was so beautiful in the book was not only, well, first of all, you're a beautiful writer,
Thank you.
But not only the experience of, it was like the parallel paths, which I so appreciate, as a psychologist, but also a medium who practices similarly to you. Like if I get messages, I'll give them to people, but I'm not out there. With a shingle, but that there was sort of the spiritual path And there was the real psychological path of the tremendous grief, and also the struggle in your marriage and the struggle with your children and the struggle in your life and all of those things that just because you believe or don't believe this, when you do believe it, it doesn't make that piece go away.
No, absolutely. That was important for me. And actually, when I spoke at the launch of my book some months back now, that was something I was very keen to get across in the beginning. It's like, look, please, I'm not standing here preaching. I don't want to be saying, well, and you know what? Because I'm a healer, I'm a medium. This is a positive experience, and you too can have a positive experience of grief. I really didn't. I got about as low as I think it's possible for somebody to go with my grief. I'll be frank, because I've written it. If it weren't for my husband and my, at that point, 2 surviving children, I really don't think I would still be here. I didn't want to be here at some points. It was so bad. So no, those spiritual beliefs and everything that I had spent, the best part of 10 years pursuing and studying for a period of time did nothing whatsoever for me. And I think that was part of my learning experience. Actually, I think I needed to go there.
So in your book, you talk about this concept, which we're going to veer off a little bit here, of conscious conception, which was fascinating to me. I feel like I could have a whole podcast on conscious conception. But what is that exactly? How did that manifest in your life? Because it really did.
I really believe that it did. And I do feel the need to state that this has nothing to do with conscious uncoupling. I kind of read that phrase in your questions and I thought, oh no. No, it's not that. So conscious conception, I had actually read about during my time as a reflexologist and a birth doula, as I've mentioned, working a lot with couples who wanted to conceive. And I became very interested in the idea that you can ask a soul or a spirit or a being to join you and in a pregnancy. And I'm fully aware of how completely left field this sounds, but I also really believe that I had direct experience of that myself, specifically with both of our daughters, oddly. With our older daughter, Layla, she's 18 months younger than our first child, so quite a close gap between them. And I do remember discussing this, coming home, being very excited, and discussing with Darius, my husband, like, I've been reading about this thing called conscious conception, where, you ask a child to come to you and join your family. And I've been reading a book that I would love to mention to your podcast, actually, it's by a guy called Walter Makichen. I think that's how you pronounce it. I think it's Kichen. And in fact, I believe he passed in about 2014 or 15 himself. But he wrote this book called Spirit Babies. And he was a spiritualist medium. He's either American or Canadian, and whichever way I pick, I'm going to offend people. So I know he wasn't British.
Somewhere in North America.
Well, yeah, right. He was an extraordinary man because he worked a lot with couples who were struggling to conceive, and also with women who had perhaps had terminations in their younger years and were feeling dreadful about that for whatever reason. And he claimed to be able to see the number of children that it was possible for each woman to have in her aura. So he would see them as orbs in your aura. And so he would clarify this by saying, you could have like 20 orbs in your aura. It doesn't mean that you're going to have 20 children. It means that you have the potential for any of those souls to become your child in this lifetime. And he said, most commonly he would see maybe 2, 3, or 4 around a woman. And that would help him to understand. And he would go into past life regression and ideas of our connections with these other spirits before, and the idea that maybe we had some kind of plan or contract between us where, let's say, he has lots of case studies. So in the book, I remember reading a story about a woman who had been struggling to conceive, and she kept having this sort of repetitive dream about being in battle. And then she had a dream where she saw this child saying, I'm not ready. I'm not ready yet. We haven't healed our wounds. And it turned out that there was a whole story connected to a past life where she had been brothers with this particular individual, and they'd fought and somehow ended up one had killed the other. And it was agreed between them that in this lifetime, he would reincarnate as her child. But because she hadn't reconciled some of that, or there was an echo of that in her current life, you get where I'm going with it, right? So there's this idea that, there are soul contracts involved, there are past life involved, but more importantly, that you can communicate with your unborn children. And he says that, a couple can do this. It's not just the woman, it's the man, but obviously it's more powerful for the woman because we're the ones who are going to be the vessel to carry that child, at least up until the present day. That's how it is. Who knows what's going to happen in future. So that's what we kind of did when we kind of half jokingly said, well, let's try it. And we did. I have to, full disclosure, I mean, we did feel really stupid. You're kind of like, you're sort of starting to get intimate, and then you're like, ooh, what are you imagining? Are you, but it was a bit weird, and it's, there was a lot of kind of giggling going on, like, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. What are we doing? But I have to say, if I can say it in a discreet way, during the night that I clearly remember that Layla was conceived, I do remember feeling really odd directly afterwards. And I did turn to my husband and say, I'm sure I've just got pregnant. I was kind of dizzy. I felt physical symptoms, but I also felt at a certain point, I can only describe it as I felt that another person had come into the room with us, which was a little unnerving in that situation. But that's what it felt like. And, if you also obviously work as a medium, it's a similar feeling to when you have a connection with somebody in the spirit world. It's that sense of presence. And I felt that, and I was pregnant. I did get pregnant, and it felt really, that felt empowering to me, despite what you may believe about some of the other things. It felt incredibly empowering and incredibly exciting to me to think, my God, I just asked this person, and here they are. It's and my daughter, that.
And what would the explanation be for people, for women who have a hard time getting pregnant or who can't get pregnant, is that they don't have those orbs in their field? Because I feel like that would be really frustrating if you were someone trying to get pregnant and you feel like you've asked, you've welcomed, you've done everything in all realms. Like, how does that get explained?
From what I can recall of this book, it's explained by, this is how this guy would then work with this woman, because he would start to talk to her about, well, look, let's go back. Have you had a termination? And actually, I had a client like this myself once who had a termination. Her current partner and she had been like childhood sweethearts. She'd become pregnant at the age of sort of 15 or 16 and had a termination. And then they carried on together. She was like 29. They got married. They wanted to have a baby. She could not get pregnant with this guy, and she was just so frustrated. I remember her coming to me constantly in tears. She was one of my first ever clients, and I remember I had this really strong feeling that she might have had a termination. And at that point, it wasn't appropriate for me to ask her, but at some point, she raised it as a comment, and I said, do you feel like in any way your feelings about that might be impacting your feelings about becoming pregnant? And this was really emotional for her. And I had to tread very carefully because I'm not a psychotherapist. So I asked her if she was having counseling. I tried to kind of direct her down that way. But it was very clear to me in that moment that there was some unresolved, basically she was holding her guilt around her like a shield, and nothing was going to get in there. She was telling herself on a subconscious level, I don't deserve to have a child. And of course she deserved to. We all have free will. We all make choices in different situations that, we may not agree with later in our lives, but that's part of life and learning. And you have to learn to accept and forgive yourself for those things. And she did go on to get pregnant and have 2 children with her husband. So I found that fascinating. And I think similarly, to address your question, he addresses it really well in the book because he gives a whole raft of case studies about women in different situations. And I don't think it was ever a case of, oh, well, sorry, there's no orbs in your aura. I think on one there was, but that was something to do with the fact that he felt this woman had somehow made a contract that in this lifetime, she wanted to live her life without children. And in fact, when she went into that in more detail, she came to realize that actually her purpose didn't involve children, and she made her peace with that. So I don't mean to sound glib, because obviously I've worked with women who are struggling to conceive, and I know how desperate that situation can be. So I would never want to come across as sort of brushing it off as, oh, well, you know what, you just decided in another life that you didn't want to do that. It's not that simple. But I would encourage anybody actually who's experiencing difficulty around conception to read Walter McCushan's book, Spirit Babies. It's a really beautiful book, actually. I used to refer a lot of clients to it. And
well, and I think what it speaks to, what your book speaks to, what all of this speaks to, is that you cannot separate our psychology from our spirituality, right? Like they are completely intertwined. And to really be spiritual, you have to be able to look inside yourself.
Yes.
A la the truth inside.
Yeah, I think that's an exceptional point. And I can relate to that in the sense that I talked about my grief in that way a lot in the early days. And I can remember saying to my husband, you know, on a spiritual level, I completely get it. You know, I can almost get to the point where I say, I'm at peace with it. I understand exactly what happened here and why. I feel that I had some kind of say in it. This was a contract. My husband and I.
Right, because those are all your belief systems.
Yes.
I mean, you believe in past lives, you believe in soul contracts. Yes. You talk about that in the book and how you've come to use that to understand.
Absolutely.
And how some of it, when you kind of look in retrospect, made sense.
Yes, very much. In a lot of ways. Very much so. But at the same time, you know, I was saying to him, and it was very obvious to people around me who loved me, that on a human level, I couldn't cope with it at all. I was angry. I was devastated. You know, I was everything you could imagine that human grief is. I was feeling it and exhibited it. And I'm trying to know who was it. It'll come back to me in a minute. Oh, hugely famous spiritual author. I quoted him actually in a talk that I did. Made exactly that point, that actually, on a spiritual level, death is a very sacred thing. And we all have an understanding of it because we are all one. Eckhart Tolle, that was it, Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, yeah,
How could I forget his name? But on a human level, it's devastating. You know, we can't escape that. It doesn't matter how spiritual you are, you're going to have a sense, you know, it does happen. There's that duality. That was really strong for me, that realization.
So last question is, how has Romy come through to you? And why do you feel like sometimes you don't feel her presence as strongly? This was pretty powerful in the book in terms of her little soul that she is.
Yes, she's come through in a variety of different ways. And at one point, the activity felt quite frequent, quite intense. And I think that was when my grief was at its toughest point. But having said that, I would say that now the sense of her permeates more. I have flowers that I have on my desk where I write. I buy her flowers every week. And when I put the flowers there, they buy her photo and I talk to her. So I feel that I maintain this connection with her. Some of the drama, I mean, obviously I'm at the moment, I don't feel the need to visit mediums or go to spiritualist churches. That's not something that I feel the need to do right now. So that side of it.
And she was 4 months old. I don't think you said that, but she was 4 months old when she died.
She was 4 months old. So, you know, and again, I totally appreciate that some people's questions may be like, well, hang on a minute, she couldn't even talk. How can you get messages from her? And I do believe that, you know, when we return to wherever it is that we come from, source, the spirit world, heaven, whatever your terminology is, I believe we then become spirit. And so the communications that I've had from her don't often involve, you know, having a chat. Well, the most recent actually was Christmas time last year. And my husband had taken our 3 children out for an hour to let me get on with, it was Christmas Eve, I think. I was getting on with some food prep or something. I just happened to walk past our living room where our Christmas tree was. We had a huge Christmas tree. And as I walked back towards the kitchen, I just saw, just from the corner of my eye, it looked like a child running past the door. And I knew my kids weren't in the house. And I had this sense of knowing immediately. And I just said, that's you, isn't it? I know that's you. And she wasn't a 4-month-old baby. It was, you know, she was the height of a 5-6-year-old girl, which is how old she would be now almost. And I just knew. And that's what I hear from a lot of other people who feel that they've had experiences or connection, is that you just know. You know, if I hadn't had that knowing, I would have thought, oh, I've just seen something. Oh, that was one of the cats. I saw something out of the corner of my eye. No, I know I saw my daughter just briefly. And I feel that I've always had a strong sense that she may help me with my work in some way. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I do remember very early on saying, I have a feeling that I'm not going to hear from her or see her so much now until we get to the point at which she would have turned 7, which is another year from now. So I'm saying that now. Who knows? I may be wrong. I'll see what happens. But I have a sense that if I pursue, my healing work or anything like that, that maybe I may get a connection with her around that time. But I don't feel bereft in any way because of the previous experiences that I've had and because of what I believe. I believe that she's not lost. I believe that she exists somewhere that's kind of, in a sense, parallel to the world that we're in. I believe she's in a better place than we all are. And that is very comforting to me. My children, my daughter in particular, they've all had little experiences that they've mentioned. And we talk about her often, and she has her own little garden in our garden with a bench with her name on and rose bushes. And so we keep her memory very much alive. And of course, the book for me, The Truth Inside, was her legacy. And even as a result of that legacy, the proceeds from both of my book launches, we set up a foundation in her name to help girls from the untouchable caste in India go to school, which they can't do. There's no way they can go to school and learn. And that we waited 4 years to find the right opportunity to honor her in that way. We wanted very much to have some kind of charitable interest or to be donating, that's that sense of, we would have bought her Christmas presents and birthday presents. We want to put that money somewhere. And that was the thing that we wanted to do, to pay for girls to learn and to study. So, we keep her alive in lots of ways, and she's in my heart. And you know what it's like, right? As a mother, if you've created and carried that child, they're never apart from you, ever. It doesn't, you're never separate. So yeah, that's positive for me.
So beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing your story. And the book is called The Truth Inside. It's on Amazon and everywhere else that books are sold, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay. And if people want to find you, where can they look?
I have a website, which is alinorell.com. That's ALINORELL.com. And you can find me. I'm not brilliant at social media. That must be an age thing. But I am on Facebook. I have an author page, Ali Norell Author, on Facebook. So you can find me on there or message me on there also.
Okay, perfect. And I'll have all those links as well in my show notes so people can reach out to you if they've, I think particularly for people who've lost a child, it's just, like you said, it's the worst thing we could possibly imagine as a parent.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for sharing your beautiful words, for sharing Romy with us, because it really is such a beautiful, beautiful story. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful
Amy.
That we connected.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.